identified as 18-year-old Salvador Ramos. He arrived at the school. He went in with tactical body armor and a rifle.
When a tragedy is committed, often there is a sense of shock, and people assert that they cannot believe the perpetrator was capable of such an act. For Salvador Ramos, the signs were always there. Ramos had bragged for years about harming animals and had discussed becoming a school shooter multiple times online. Fellow employees at the Wendy's where he worked say that aside from being extremely rude to his female coworkers, he made a very obvious effort to avoid all contact with anyone and isolated himself much of the time. On the morning of May 24, 2022, Ramos got into a fight with his 66-year-old grandmother over a phone bill. Ramos shot her in the face and fled their home. He stole her black 2008 Ford F-150, which he used to transport the gun and ammunition he had been saving. Ramos's grandmother survived and managed to get to her neighbors for help. She was airlifted to the hospital, and the police were called in to begin a search for Ramos. Ramos had been in contact with a girl from Germany. He messaged her before he shot his grandmother to tell her that was what he was going to do, and then again afterward to confirm he had shot her. He then sent another message saying he was going to commit a school shooting. The girl responded with, "Cool." Later, she was charged and found guilty of failure to report planned crimes, and was issued a warning and was required to undergo educational measures. At 11:28 a.m., Ramos crashed the truck through a barricade and into a concrete ditch outside Robb Elementary School. Ramos wore a non-protective tactical vest for carrying ammunition and carried a backpack and rifle as he scaled a fence and made it onto school grounds. Before attempting to enter the school, Ramos fired shots at two people outside of a nearby funeral home, but both managed to escape uninjured. A 911 call was made, and a school resource officer drove to the school's campus and pursued a teacher whom the officer wrongly believed to be the gunman, driving past Ramos in the process. Ramos entered the school through a door that had been shut by a teacher who had spotted him. The entrance door did not lock, despite being designed to be locked when shut. A report released on July 6th found that an officer had aimed his rifle at Ramos before he entered the school, but did not fire because he was awaiting his supervisor's permission. Once inside, Ramos walked down two short hallways and then entered a classroom that was internally connected to another classroom. The facilities were centered in this area. When teacher Irma Garcia attempted to lock the door to the classroom, he shot the door's window, then backed Garcia into the classroom and said, "Good night," as he shot and killed her. He then told the students that they were all going to die. Turning on what a later survivor would describe as sad music, Ramos opened fire on the students and another teacher. The majority of the shooting occurred within the first few minutes. Ramos was inside the classroom for over an hour, while armed police remained outside the classroom and building. Many students attempted to play dead, and one survivor describes how she smeared herself with the blood from her dead friend in hopes that it would make her ruse look believable. Arnulfo Reyes, a teacher who had received multiple gunshot wounds, instructed his students to get under their desks and act like they were asleep. At first, Ramos crept around the room, firing indiscriminately. But then he fired a more targeted second round, striking the students he missed the first time. All 11 students in the classroom perished. Ramos attempted to enter a third classroom, but the teacher had managed to jam the door, causing him to give up and return to the first two rooms. Officers arrived 3 minutes after Ramos entered the school and approached rooms 111 and 112, but they retreated after Ramos fired at them. They attempted negotiations, but Ramos didn't respond to their efforts. United States Marshal Service deputies arrived at 12:10, where they helped in the initial confrontation with Ramos and secure the perimeter. The school district's police chief, Pedro Arredondo, erroneously determined that the situation had transitioned from an active shooter to a barricaded subject. Believing Ramos to be contained, officials thought they had bought enough time to bring in tactical units. A group of anxious parents pleaded with police officers to enter the building and offered to enter themselves if the police wouldn't. After being refused, some parents attempted to force their way in and were held back, tackled, and threatened with the use of pepper spray. A mother of 2 students at the school was placed in handcuffs by officers for attempting to enter the school. When she was released, she jumped the fence and retrieved her children, exiting before the police entered. An off-duty Border Patrol tactical agent rushed to the scene after receiving a text from his wife. armed with a shotgun lent to him by his barber. He arrived 1 hour before first responders, where he helped to evacuate children. Additional BORTAC agents arrived, but they did not have a battering ram or other breaching tools, so a U.S. Marshal on the scene provided agents with a ballistic shield. Ramos stayed in the classroom for about 1 hour, hiding behind a steel door that officers said they could not open until they obtained a master key from the janitor. There is evidence, however, that the door was never locked. Once the door was finally opened, Ramos opened fire at the group from a closet in the room before officials returned fire and killed him. Later, during an interview with a local paper, Police Chief Pedro Arredondo said he arrived at the school thinking he was the first law enforcement officer on the scene. He abandoned his police and campus radios because he wanted his hands free to shoot the gunman, and he also thought the radios would slow him down. Arredondo claimed to be unaware of 911 calls made from the students and teachers in the room because he did not have a communications device, nor did any other officer nearby. Arredondo said that he did not consider himself the incident commander for law enforcement. Instead, his role was a frontline responder, with him assuming someone else was in command. However, this goes against the National Incident Management System, which guides all levels of government on how to respond to emergency events, which says that the first person on the scene is the incident commander. Arredondo was aware that the gunman was firing shots from within the classroom, grazing some police officers. According to Arredondo, he and the officers in the school hallway did their best to remain quiet, only whispering to each other, fearing that if the gunman heard them, he would shoot at them. He spent over an hour in the hallway, where he held back from the classroom doors for 40 minutes to avoid attracting gunfire. Arredondo had been elected to the Uvalde City Council a few weeks before the shooting occurred. In spite of the harsh criticism he faced from the public, it was decided to swear him in on May 31st. After pressure and bad publicity from the public, he was placed on administrative leave and resigned from the council on July 2nd. The Uvalde School Board voted unanimously on August 24th to terminate Arredondo's contract as police chief. On July 17th, the Texas House Investigative Committee released a 77-page report on systemic failures and egregiously poor decision-making that exacerbated the shooting and criticized state and federal officials and agencies in addition to local police. The report said that a total of 376 law enforcement officials responded to the shooting, including 149 Border Patrol agents and 91 state police officers. According to the New York Times, the report found that the Uvalde police chief knew that a child had made 911 calls from inside a classroom, but that none of the officers who learned of the calls advocated for shifting to an active shooter-style response, or otherwise acting more urgently to breach the classrooms. In the wake of the shooting, the entire town of Uvalde was left traumatized, not only by the terrible action itself, but by the grossly incompetent way in which it was handled by law enforcement. Could this have been prevented entirely if people had acted on the warning signs presented by Salvador Ramos? Could the school have done a better job implementing and maintaining security measures? And finally, the more publicly debated question: could the losses have been lowered if law enforcement had done a better job of following protocol and been more proactive? Regardless, whatever measures are implemented in the future, and no matter who is held accountable, it comes as too little and too late for the families of those that were lost.
97 killers typically Chicago, he gets free when he still gets